Very good afternoon, our viewers today. Today I'm carrying Lithuania. And, first of all, I want to thank those who support me, because there is no one else to ask for support. Our Lithuanians' support, I do not dispute, indeed. And why such a request now? Because I'm going to go to a European country, there will be such an exchange. I will be reading some such report. By the way, about the actions of Russia from a very interesting angle of the so-called candle of the Lithuanian moon, and in parallel, I will be interviewing. I will bring you this interview, I think you will be interested, because it will bring me closer to very iconic figures in the European Union. So every thread is very important to me, and everyone, friends, is kind of counting now, because it's very, very, very expensive. Merlat Company has been producing Erbach since 2015 year, and currently holds a leading position on wild berries and ozone. Duck pasta is prepared according to a traditional Dagestan recipe. It includes an Erbach made of super healthy flax seeds, natural honey, and a little melted butter. Follow the link in the description and order Mellat Erbach. Excellent delicious desserts are suitable both as a healthy snack and as a means of general prevention of your health. And that's why today, as always, 2 weeks have passed. Our dear friends, the Foundation of Conceptual Technologies, Valeriy Viktorovich Pyakin. Very good afternoon. Hello. And right away, Valeriy Viktorovich, I have to show you, our viewers, and announce to everyone the 3-volume War, the State, Bolshevism. Me, I already have them. Thank you for sending them, and somehow I managed to take them here, clear customs, so it's called, and so on and so forth. So now I will read, and from these books, I will somehow shine through the issues that are very important. And the first question in the same way, this is Russia Day, your Commander-in-Chief speaks to the heroes of the front. And his most basic words are time, heroes, courage, will, love.
И самые основные слова у него – это время, герои, храбрость, воля, любовь.
All these words, Valeriy Viktorovich, refer to the words of the energy flow. And if we now understand that time is energy, and Russia is controlled directly by the Creator, then we must state that all the time and energy is now in Russia, and everyone around it is in a hurry, because they do not have energy and time. Am I defining correctly? Well, in general, yes. The only state, the only civilization, because Russia is not just a state, it is a civilization. Now on the planet, this is Russia, which can afford to act systematically and not fit into someone else's rules. Russia is engaged in time-forming activities. And the way Russia works, everyone else has to fit in. We have already said a lot about this, that Russia, it is always subject, in whatever state of state sovereignty it may be. Because Russia, in terms of its power, in terms of its size, in terms of its resource potential, and more even here, not natural, but human, laid down precisely in the Soviet period, that's it. Because this is exactly what manifested itself according to the law of time in the second half of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, or rather in the middle of the 20th century, and at the beginning, through the revolution. There, when Russia was scrapped, as Russia was going to the colony to the west. Here, but after Russia gained its full sovereignty, and this is the Soviet Union, and this was expressed in the coat of arms, in the flag. Look at the situation that has occurred. Then, in the Second World War, one of the elements that was our great patriotic war, Russia, the USSR fought against the entire United West.
Россия, СССР сражалась против всего объединенного Запада.
Exactly the same thing is happening now. And then they decided that no, Russia would not stand. Many have decided so. Here, but Russia survived and won. The same thing is now, when a special military operation has begun, and many people in our country have decided that Russia will not stand. The economy is not the same. That's it. We need to negotiate with the West. Let's negotiate faster, sign the surrender. And this was the essence of the first negotiations in Minsk and Istanbul, held in the 22nd year. But, since the West believed that Russia was not finished off, it should be put in tougher conditions, they broke it. But now they are getting the result they worked for. It turned out that they had not taken into account the potential of Russia, namely the human potential, the potential of the Russian state culture at all. They didn't understand him. They have a Western culture. And that is why the West has always treated Russia with the mind according to the poem, "It is impossible to measure Russians in general," because they understand it purely pragmatically. And the Russian civilization is a humanistic civilization in terms of preserving peoples, their culture, and developing. And the West, wherever it comes, it destroys the peoples of culture, taking material values. And apart from material values, there is nothing in the West. So, when Marshal Minich's famous expression that Russia is governed directly from above, otherwise, it is impossible to understand how it has been preserved. They understood how, didn't they? Western culture. The state ends where the tip of your sword ends. That is, when you can quickly influence someone to force obedience. But you showed books. It's all there. The first volume of the state, it is described in detail there. And in Russia, the state was built on the principle of the idea when small detachments of Russian Cossack people went and offered the peoples a way of life. And they offered, in principle, protection from genocide carried out by other nations. That's how Russia has lined up. And that is why the peoples who entered the Russian world, they survived, they were able to develop. And many of those peoples who were without writing even got their writing. Here. So what's going on here? Russian culture was carried. The Russian world was carried. And therefore here is a huge country. In the West, it is simply impossible to name such a single subject. Think of the patchwork of 19th century Europe, where small states, the largest of which was France. Here, and well, the Austrian Empire, if you take it like that, then how were they managed? On the principle of suppression or friendship against a common enemy, for example, the Austrian Empire against the Ottoman Empire. Here, and in Russia, it was she who entered in order to be preserved. And so it didn't matter what was there in Moscow when it would come there. We lived according to the rules of the Russian world, immediately and everywhere. And so the state's manageability was maintained, which is far away. When will the courier arrive? And here they decide on the spot how to live. In a divine way, in Russian. That's how Russia stood up. And the same thing has now manifested itself when a special military operation began. They piled on the whole world. I want to interrupt you a little bit and show you one passage that is very important, because I think it's just right now for a second. Here's a look, please. And while our people, bleeding to death, defended the great socialist conquest, our motherland. Thieves' leftovers came to life and sprouted here. They organized and merged into a gang, and gangs, raspberries appeared. Speculators have flourished on our difficulties. And now, when the most terrible war is over, this bandit swamp, saturated with captured weapons, is still stirring. Well, they take advantage of the fact that there are temporarily not enough experienced personnel for their complete and final eradication. Many of our comrades died on the war fronts. Experienced specialists are not enough yet. And that is why we have great hopes for the replenishment coming to us from the ranks of frontline soldiers. We hope for their fearlessness, dedication, frontline ingenuity, and observation. Valeriy Viktorovich, didn't it seem to you that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, at the same meeting, was talking about this? That young fighters, experienced at the front, should now restore order inside Russia again. Well, yes, as after the Great Patriotic War, the frontline soldiers became the core. The restoration of the country, the strengthening of its sovereignty, and now it is the frontline soldiers, who will be the very personnel base that will allow Russia to preserve its sovereignty and move towards the development of Russia. But Russia's enemies also understand this, and therefore they want to drag out the war in every possible way, so as to kill as many motivated people as possible, who are naturally patriots of Russia at the front, and those who come. You understand, there are various bribe takers, crooks who have gained a foothold in power for 30 years, came there in the 90s. And here they are, just dreaming that an honest, good person, a professional in his field, who will think about the development of the motherland, about how people live, and, of course, the bribe taker needs to leave, will come to them. No, the bribe takers will resist. And now we are already seeing. No sooner had the first one been appointed deputy mayor than he was immediately killed. This is indicative for everyone. Do you think you will come, and you will be in control? No. We're going to kill you all. You will not be killed at the front. We will kill you here if you only try to run the state, not in the interests of the United States, not in the interests of the West. That is, you, if you want sovereignty, which means then there is no need, there will be no corruption, there will be no sale of the motherland. And how so? They can't do that. After all, what is being noted for the current personnel corps? Professionalism is zero. They follow instructions. They work in the established system of colonial administration. And the feast of the 12th of June. After all, it is just a holiday of establishing the status of Russia as a colony of the West, a raw material appendage from the West, which is expressed in the national flag. We have an absolutely colonial flag, a white, blue, red tricolor given by the Dutch to the father of Peter the Great. But we have already talked about this many times, everyone knows perfectly well. But when they say, Peter approved this flag, first of all, this is a lie and Peter did not approve it. And secondly, what do we need in order for Peter to approve something given by the Dutch? Yes, to reject the entire Russian history and culture on the basis of which Russia stands. Russia stands on its history and culture, so we must reject everything Russian in order to accept the colonial status that was given to the Dutch. Well, this is, well, just beyond the limit. But it works for certain people. Peter gave it. That's why he went to bow to the West. And he did not bow to the West. Peter personally went to the West, looked at what was going on and said, well, they did not overtake us in crafts and sciences, while we were doing our business here in the time of troubles. Here. Therefore, let's take the crafts of science. But we will manage the state in our own way, in Russian. We don't need it. And it should be noted that in the state administration, in the army under Alexei Mikhailovich the Quietist, there were more foreigners than under Peter. Why are they silent about this? Peter made a noise, he put his own. The chicks forgot Petrov's nest, and then they say, here he put his own there. And he was just building his team of like-minded people on the basis of a common culture. Here, because this is a much deeper coincidence vector of the match in the depth of the vector of goals than those that are chained by one. Or rather, how they are there. Bound by one goal, bound by one chain. Because they have some kind of goal, united. Because they are bound by one goal. And if there is no such goal, and they are not bound by one, they are already all disintegrating. That's why there are small states in the West, and Russia has developed into such a state. And Russia, in its own, well, quality, it is always subjective. She cannot be ignored. This is what is expressed in the English expression about the fleet being. In other words, the fleet exerts its influence by its very existence. So, Russia, it's even in a colonial fleet-bin state. That is, when they have an impact by their very existence. And if Russia is already active, a fleet of bin, then that's it. Russia is here. They can no longer ignore it. They have to adapt to it. In other words, if Russia has a state administration, it is in the person of the sovereign of Russia Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Then everyone is forced to adjust. But even here, the Sabindasics inside Russia do not want this. They don't want Russia to be sovereign. They want Russia to be a raw material appendage of the West. And that's why they resist. You know, so that's why everyone didn't understand that Trump congratulated on the day of Russia, that is, with his colony. He congratulated his colony. But a colony is not a colony. Now we need to look at the United States from a different angle, that they already say that about 10 states, that is, cities there are really starting to burn. In other words, look, isn't it necessary for Trump, with all this, to rely on the same Russia now? Yes, it is absolutely necessary. And he understands that very well. And so the situation here is not even in the sense that he congratulated Russia as a colony, but that he congratulated Russia at least with something. For the West, this is a pattern break. Russia is a colony that has nothing to congratulate at all. Therefore, Russia only needs to be crushed and robbed. And look, here we have published in our Telegram channel so recently that the Western information field begins. Why is the West so ready for a conflict with Russia? Because they believe that internal traitors in Russia will ensure the defeat of Russia, ensure the victory of the West. This is what they are talking about directly there. Directly. But it has already begun to break through to us. We are suddenly finally starting to notice it. Neither the YouTube ban nor access to foreign publications helped. In other words, the information field that the West is going to a confrontation with Russia, because they are counting on internal betrayal in the West, is so dense that it is already forced to break out of everyone. We sort of keep quiet about it. Here, in fact, we have Russia. Now the state administration, it fully corresponds to the essence of the state emblem. In general, the state emblem, symbols. These are our state symbols, state sovereignty, and it means a lot. And the double-headed eagle is exactly the situation in which Russia, as a state, is not a monolithic state, in the sense of conceptual certainty. But two heads that look in different directions. What does the Bible say? A kingdom divided in itself will not stand. A house divided in itself will collapse. So we have seen all the states that had double-headed eagles, and they went through a period of conceptual uncertainty, and all ended in death.
Они проходили через период концептуальной неопределенности, и все заканчивали гибелью.
The period of existence of these states was determined by the duration of the processes according to the law of time. All this is spelled out in the concept of public safety. And so now all processes are accelerating. And we see how Putin represents the patriotic part of Russia, which is fighting for the sovereignty of the state. Russian culture, the Russian world, identity, which is in order to preserve Russian culture, the Russian world. Here. And we see a certain part of the elite that is fighting for Russia to not exist, for the West to defeat Russia, for Russia to be a raw material appendage. And here is one patriotic head. It is personified specifically in the manager. This is Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. And the second head of traitors, it is represented by an avatar, a frontman. This is Nabulina. This is the central bank that manages our economy in such a way that everyone can survive. We have two economies. One is subordinate to Putin, removed from the control of the central bank. And we live there at the expense of this economy. And the other part of the economy is being burned out by napalm, by Nabulina, the central bank, insane rates, the ruble exchange rate, and everything else. All of this just shows that Russia is not conceptually defined. And here the enemies are Russia. They are counting on these traitors inside the country to ensure victory over Russia. Whenever someone invaded Russia, they always counted on internal betrayal. They have always understood perfectly well that Russia cannot be broken by military means, by economic means. And in the West, the country elites of the United States and subordinates and European. These elites, avatars, sub-officials are European, and they stand on the same position. But the globalists, and they understand Russia more deeply, they know history more deeply. Remember, everyone laughed at Jen Psaki, that she was so stupid. Then we became convinced that the entire state administration of the United States is stupid. There's just a wildness in knowledge. They don't know anything. They don't know how to do anything. But due to the fact that both the state and supranational governance mechanisms have been built from the supranational level, the state still lives. Here are many who argue that why the United States has not yet died. Why the ruble? It's the dollar that hasn't collapsed. They are not of these mechanisms, nor of what the state is, and what supranational governance is. They don't even understand. This is in our book, in the 3-volume War of the State. Bolshevism. So, are they counting on us to crush Russia now? We have so many traitors out there. And it seems that at the front, we see a manifestation of the fact that traitors help. After all, you see, the rear of Ukraine is being taken care of. Everything reaches the front line, despite the fact that Russian intelligence knows where which trains are loaded, where they stand, how they move. And they can be destroyed as they approach the front, and even at loading points. But they don't download it, they don't get destroyed. So someone is doing it. That's what the traitors are counting on. And globalists understand that traitors will not be able to reverse it. With any measure of bloodshed and events in Russia, only one scenario is possible, which provides that either Russia is a state, a sovereign state, or, as Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, the sovereign of Russia, designated, we are in paradise, and you just die.
Как обозначил Владимир Владимирович Путин, государь России, мы в рай, а вы просто сдохнете.
Globalists understand this, and they understand that they have reached a situation where it is necessary to dump Russia. We need to move away. Otherwise, there will be
Иначе
a nuclear
будет ядерная
catastrophe.
катастрофа. А
But the
вот
sub-officials all over the
подбросите во
world
всем
and the
мире и
American country
американские
elites,
страновые
as the
элиты,
practice
что
of public
показывает
administration in the
практика
United States shows,
осуществления
they do not understand this.
государственного управления в Соединенных Штатах, они этого не понимают.
Again,
Мы,
we
опять же, в своем
published a couple of
телеграм-канале
American materials in our Telegram
пару
channel.
материалов.
How did
Именно
American political
американские,
scientists
как
think?
американские
Is there a state of the
политологи
United States at all,
задумались,
or
а
is it
есть
some
ли
other
вообще
formation?
государство Соединенных Штатов? Или же это есть какое-то другое
They haven't
формирование,
figured
еще
out
не
yet that
додумались,
this
что
is a
это
gang
политическое
association.
объединение.
Here we
Вот,
are exercising
специальное
control over the
государство.
state,
Но они уже
but they have
поняли,
already
что
realized that this
это
is
не
not a state.
государство.
With
При
all the
всех
external
внешней
attributes of the
атрибутике
state of the
государства
United
Соединенных
States,
Штатов
the United States
государством
is not a
Соединенные
state.
Штаты не являются.
Here,
Вот.
so,
Так вот,
not being a state of the
не
United States,
являясь
they have a
государством
limit to the
Соединенных
possibility
Штатов,
of
у
governing
них
from the
есть
supranational level,
предел
and
возможностей
maintaining the state
управления с
structure, the state
надгосударственного уровня и
administration of the United States
поддержания
proper.
государственного устройства, государственного управления собственно Соединенных Штатов.
What we
То,
are
что
seeing
мы
now in the United
сейчас
States is
видим
not at all what
в
happened in the United
Соединенных
States.
Штатах, это совсем не то, что в Соединенных Штатах бывало.
What's
Что
the
там?
first
Первый
time
раз, что
that
и
Los Angeles is
Лос-Анджелес
worried,
волнуется.
and
И
they
туда
never brought
никогда
troops
войска
there,
не заводили.
and the
Причем
Marines who simply
морскую
shot.
пехоту, которая просто-напросто расстреливала.
It is
Ну,
necessary to
чему
teach
учили,
what,
так
so
оно
it
и
leads.
идет.
And so it was.
Было.
What is the
Что
first
первый
time that
раз,
he is
что
worried
и
about
при
Trump?
Трампе волнуется.
Remember this
Вспомните
anti-Trump
вот эту
revolution of the
антитрамповскую
boom with this
революцию
Floyd and
БЛМ,
so on,
с этим
how all this state was
Флойдом-то,
smashed.
и прочее, как все это государство-то разносили.
But the
Но
fact
дело
is
в
that
том,
at present,
что в
everything has
настоящее
acquired a
время
qualitatively different
всё
level of
приобрело
confrontation between clan corporate groups in the United States
иной
itself.
уровень противостояния кланово-корпоративных группировок в самих Соединенных Штатах.
When they begin to
Когда
use the mechanisms
начинают
of state influence no longer on the streets, when they beat these
механизмы
fools who came out there to make some noise,
воздействия
to step up.
уже не на улицах, когда бьют вот этих вот дурачков, которые вышли там чего-то пошуметь, повыступать,
And when the power showdowns begin, it is in the power elites.
разборки именно во властных элитах.
And there is no
Здесь
need for
не
name
надо про
calling.
обзывашки.
What's
Когда
Gavin Newsom
Гевин
calling Trump?
Ньюсом обзывает
Calling Gavin
Трампа,
Newsom Trump.
Трамп обзывает Гевина Ньюсома. Ну
Well,
вот
they
они
are now
сейчас,
Trump
Трамп
and Musk
с
quarreled for a
Маском
while.
поссорились какое-то время.
Musk then
Маск
sobered up, said,
потом
Sorry, I was drunk.
протрезвел,
I
сказал,
said a lot.
извини, выпивший был.
I'm
Много
sorry,
наговорил,
Trump.
извиняюсь,
Nothing.
Трамп,
You're
да
my
ничего,
friend.
ты мой друг.
That's
Уже
it.
всё,
Sort
как бы.
of.
Но то, о
But
чем
what I
я
talked
говорил
about in the
в вопросе
question
опять же
answer in our
предыдущем
previous issue is not in the
нашем
sense of an
выпуске.
interview with you,
Не в
but in
том
the
смысле
issue of the
интервью
question
вам,
answer of the
а
Foundation
в
for
выпуске
Conceptual
вопрос-ответ фонда
Technologies.
концептуальных технологий.
That
Да,
is,
вот который,
that's the
который
one that
только
just came out.
вышел.
Yes,
Да-да-да.
yes,
Там
yes.
я,
I'm
вся
there.
передача шла
The whole
именно о
program
структуре
was
и
about the
системе
structure and system of power
власти в
in a crowd elite
полутоталитарном
society.
обществе. Я
I
там
tried to put
постарался
very serious
уложить
theoretical things
очень
into images
серьезные
there.
теоретические вещи в образы.
I brought
Приводил
books,
книги,
I brought
приводил
films,
фильмы,
I showed
там
them where these
показывал, где
processes
на
can be
образах
viewed on
эти
images.
процессы можно посмотреть.
So,
Так вот,
no,
нет.
the issue of
Вопрос
confrontation is completely different.
противостояния совершенно другой.
But imagine when it was that a
Когда
senator
это
broke into a
было,
minister's press
чтобы
conference
сенатор
and tried to
врывался
disrupt
на
it.
пресс-конференцию министра, пытался ее сорвать.
And as a
И
result,
в
his security
результате
service
этого
NITS puts on the
его
floor,
служба
handcuffs the senator.
безопасности вяжет, кладет на пол, заковывает в наручники сенатора.
In other
То
words, now we see that the United
сейчас мы
States is in the
видим,
process of
что в
deploying the Civil War in
Соединенных
full.
Штатах идет процесс развертывания гражданской войны по полной программе.
And
И
he's not
он
just going to make a
идет
picture there on the
уже
street,
не
but will
просто
decide
там на
behind the
улице
scenes
что-то
here in
там
the silence of
картиночку
the
сделают,
offices,
а мы здесь
and do it right.
кулуарно порешаем в тишине кабинетов и сделаем как надо.
As it
Как
was,
это было,
for
например,
example,
на
on the
Майдане,
Maidan in
на
Ukraine,
Украине,
in
на
other orange,
других
these same
оранжевых
color
этих
revolutions,
самых
as it
цветных
was under
революциях.
Trump.
Как это было
His first
при
term, when Trump was
Трампе,
deactivated
первый
in
его
full,
срок,
hanging
когда
over it.
Трампа дезактивировали по полной программе, нависнув это.
No,
Нет.
Now the
Сейчас
confrontation between the ruling elites has
противостояние
reached an
между
open level,
властными элитами вышло на открытый уровень.
and it
И
wasn't done
сделано
by
это
Trump.
было не Трампом.
Remember how they wanted
Вспомните,
to plant
как
Trump.
хотели посадить Трампа.
How many
Сколько
people
под
did it,
это делали,
fabricated
фабриковали
cases.
дела.
And
И
what do
вы
you
что
think?
думаете, не
There will be
будет
no confrontation
противостояния
at
на
the same
таком же
open level.
открытом
That
уровне?
is,
То есть,
how there is an impact gives rise to
как там,
opposition.
воздействие рождает противодействие.
So,
Так
it
вот,
is the fact that during
именно
Biden's administration of the
тот
country,
факт,
in
что
quotation
и
marks,
в
competing,
период
conflicting,
управления
hostile to
страной
each other clan
Байдена, в
corporate groupings
кавычках,
have developed, which will use the state
сложились
apparatus. In order to defeat the opposing grouping,
конфликтные,
this just shows the
враждебные
level of the
друг другу
fact that a civil war is
кланово-корпоративные
beginning.
группировки, которые и будут использовать государственный аппарат для того, чтобы победить противостоящую группировку, это как раз и показывает уровень того, что начинается гражданская война.
But under
Но
Trump, in
не
previous
было
years, when the army and the police were used to suppress street
года,
protests, there was
когда
no way
использовали
for
армию и
some
полицию для
military
подавления
personnel to make a
уличных
statement
протестов,
that they
для
would
того,
refuse to
чтобы
obey the
какие-то
command because they are with the
военнослужащие
people.
делали заявление, что они будут отказываться подчиняться командованию, потому что они с народом.
And
А
now it
сейчас
is.
это есть.
In other
То есть
words,
это уже
it is
конкретно
already specifically beginning
начинают
to break in the power
разлом
structures.
и в силовых структурах.
In
То есть
other words,
вспомните, как
remember
во
how in
всех
all these orange
этих
color revolutions, it is exactly this.
оранжевых цветных революциях именно это.
That
То
is,
есть
individual
отдельные
defectors,
перебежчики,
I am with the
я с
people,
народом,
and
а
then as a
потом
result,
в
the
результате
power
падает
falls.
власть.
They
Они
are trying to
пытаются
implement the
реализовать
technology of
в
this color
Соединенных Штатах
revolution
именно
in the United
технологию
States.
вот этой цветной революции.
Trump is
Трамп
well aware of the
прекрасно
danger of these
понимает
processes.
опасность этих процессов.
This is
Это
supranational governance.
надгосударственное управление.
Trump's
Команду
team was
Трампа
formed from
сформировали
above.
сверху.
The most
Под нее
serious
заведены
resources of
самые
supranational management are brought under it,
ресурсы надгосударственного управления.
and all
И
of them
все они
bound by one goal,
связанные
bound by one
одной
chain.
целью, скованные одной цепью.
If the ship
Если
sinks,
корабль
everyone will
будет
drown.
тонуть, утонут все.
They need to
Им
stand
нужно
up.
выстоять. Отсюда
Hence
и
Musk's
примирение
reconciliation
Маска
with
с
Trump.
Трампом.
Trump needs to reform at the United States because everyone thinks that ha talked and did nothing. Such large projects are not solved so quickly. How is Ivan Vasilievich changing his profession there? Remember, he escorts the ambassador, who demanded the Kemskaya Volist. He says, well, you know, comrade, such issues are not solved with a kondachka. Check in during the week. Here. So, well, there was a completely different process. He went up to this bunch and said, what are you doing, royal muzzle? Why are you squandering public lands? You can't get enough land that way. Here, therefore, there is a slightly different process here, but the situation in which this Western world order is built, it requires that the idea be established. But Overton's windows, so that it all gets stronger, so that it can be discussed. But don't push right away. A hitandrun has been carried out. Let the object settle down. The time will come to return to it. But the question here is, the time will come. And now there are anti-Trump forces in the United States that need to defeat Russia at all costs. They understand that if they don't impose conditions on Trump now, under which Nixon took Johnson's war in Vietnam on himself, and flew off on it, if they don't do this to Trump, then Trump will throw off Russia precisely in order to transform the United States and gain additional territories because it interferes. Russia, he needs to implement these projects. They don't understand, country people, that from the point of view of the global project, the Pax Americana is over, And the United States is being turned into an ordinary state. And an ordinary state lives off its resources, not robbing the world. And where should the American country elites go? They were bred. How much to control the whole world? They don't understand this management. They think they need to smash Russia now to get to its resources, as it was in the 91st year. There are many traitors. He manages everything like Nabiulina. Only it remains to put the squeeze on. And global sheiky understand no. Well, in February of 1917th year, put the squeeze on the Russian Empire. She collapsed. How did it end? The fact that it was October of 1917th year, the Great October Socialist Revolution. And as a result, we got a superpower, the #1 superpower, the Soviet Union, which was able to survive in the Second World War against everyone, using its opponents to fight each other, partly pulling each other's resources, and partly receiving these resources in the form of lend-lease in order to fight and survive. Because they were interested in it. That is, they were put like that. Globalists understand this, and they do not want Russia to stand up to its full height, become a sovereign state, become the center of the world, not global, but global, the center of concentration of governance, and build the Russian world. And then where to go with the construction of their world? They are also moving the centers of concentration of management to China, to Iran. Oh, what interesting events are taking place in Iran. Here. So, where to go with this? So what do they need to do? They are trying to implement, to give pause. In other words, let's do the same thing that was done with the Soviet Union in its first iteration. In other words, we will give it some time. It will restore its sovereignty. This superpower will be considered, but internal rot will not allow this to persist to the state and develop. And in the end, it will fall back into the hands of the West because of the elite. Come and own us. And to do this, it is necessary to preserve as much as possible various pro-Western elements in the management of the state, in culture, in education, everywhere, so that it then works. The confrontation with the globalist with the country specialists will lead to the fact that Russia will be forced to clean up, as in the 17th year. And then, what is it all about? And the whole pro-Western elite, it's gone. There were only patriots who developed the country. The same thing can happen now if the country officials continue to push. Therefore, globalists need to stop this pressure. They need to preserve the rotting inside the country. Let it remain with this colonial status. Let them be proud of this flag, but for a while they will consider themselves sovereign. And as a result, this rotting inside will grow, and the country will collapse. And hence the difference. Trump and the company Global Sheiky, they congratulate Russia. That is, all guys, we measure ourselves, we accept you in this state. That's it, we fit in, we agree somewhere in the world, and the country officials say, and we will have nothing to eat. What are you suggesting, that we work inside your state? After all, yes, the resource state will be provided. Canada and Greenland, after all, are being resource-driven. And now technologies exist such that previously inaccessible natural resources of Greenland are becoming available, as well as Canada. Here. That is, as if the resource will be provided. But it also sharply narrows the circle of those who will be allowed to consume these resources. And astronomers don't want to do that. They want to repeat the feint of the 91st year again, to reach all the resources of Russia again, to destroy the Russian people, as they destroyed the Indians, and consume these resources. And they can't do it. That's why they have such
отсюда-то у них
hatred for
такая
what Trump is doing.
ненависть к тому, что делает Трамп.
And
А у
Trump,
Трампа
we will
вот
congratulate
мы
you.
поздравим.
It doesn't
Нам
matter.
важно.
We
Это
understand
мы
this from a
понимаем с
global
глобального
level,
уровня, что
that we
Россию
congratulate
поздравляют с
Russia on its
колониальным
colonial
статусом,
status,
а пусть они
and let them
считают, что
think
это
that it is a
суверенное
sovereign
государство. А
Russia,
нам нужно
and we need to
сбросить
dump certain
Россию
problems on
определенные
Russia.
проблемы.
While
Пока
Russia
Россия
is
будет
dealing with the
заниматься
problem of
проблемами
the post-Soviet
постсоветского
space,
пространства,
we will reformat the whole
мы
world. We will finally bring Iran to mind
весь мир,
and build a
мы
bipolar
наконец-то
tandem
доведем до
control.
ума Иран и выстроим двуполярное вот это вот управление тандемное.
Eurasian Euro-Atlantic blocks,
Евроатлантический
but
блок.
only
Но
now
только
with
теперь будет
positions in
позициями
China,
в Китае,
where the
куда
Euro-Atlantic bloc
евроатлантический
and the
блок и
Eurasian one are
евроазиатский — это
Iran.
Иран.
That is the
Вот в чем
essence of
суть
this
этого
congratulation.
поздравления.
Here,
Вот.
in
То
other
есть
words,
ему
he needs to
нужно во
dump
что бы то ни
Russia at
стало
all costs.
сбросить Россию.
There are a lot of
Проблем
problems
очень
in the world.
много в мире.
It is the
Именно
United
у
States.
Соединенных Штатов.
And if
А
they get
если
involved in
ввяжутся в
Russia,
Россию,
then Russia will
то
still be forced to
тогда
complete
Россия будет
self-purification in the
вынуждена
elites. And
всё-таки
Russia will
до
again
конца
become a
довести
global center of
самоочищение
concentration
в
of
элитах,
management.
и Россия снова станет общемировым центром концентрации управления.
And the
И
Russian
русский мир,
world,
который в
which in
советское
Soviet
время
times,
уже в
already in
постсталинские
post-Stalin times,
времена
came to
на
Africa on the inertia
инерции
of the Soviet Union.
Советского
And now
Союза
Africa is
пришел
all looking at Russia.
в Африку, и теперь Африка вся смотрит на Россию.
Finally, the
Наконец-то
Russians
придут
will come,
русские, и
and our
у нас
colonialism
колониализм
will
исчезнет
disappear
вообще,
altogether,
а не то, как
not
он
the way it was
был
reformatted.
переформатирован.
Here
Вот
is the
такая
situation. That's why I wanted to show this excerpt from the film, The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed, because I looked at how Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin held this meeting, and I immediately got this film as if before my eyes. And that's why we see now that two processes have been launched, the civil war, as you said, in the United States, and the process of Russia's sovereignization. They are moving in parallel now, but another very powerful process is moving in parallel. This is a process that relies on its ideological might, as it were. This is called exclusivity. And when we know who we are, who is one exceptional people, and with great superiority on our earth, and we are turning to Israel, what it has started doing now, as if it started launching a rocket towards Iran, but also to Israel. You know, Valeriy Viktorovich, now slaves are yelling at everyone, from every iron. All these Israeli radicals are yelling. And they are moving anyway about what? About the 1,000-year Sabbath, that is, about the Khazaria. They are it now from every iron. I'm talking about the fact that the United States needs Israel as a military machine, too. The US has problems inside, and Israel is now attacking Iran. Are these the same parallels or a completely new process? Here, well, we have repeatedly talked about Israel, and that Kissinger determined that 70 years of Israel's existence and more, it should be eliminated. And we see that the process of Israel's liquidation, no matter how it is resisted, it is still going methodically. Here, that's what I'm talking about, yes. But there are 2 points here. In what happened with this Israeli attack on Iran, this is the moment of what to do and how to do with Israel in order to eliminate it. And what to do and how to do with Iran, so that Iran takes place as a center of concentration, of control of the Eurasian bloc. After all, we see that Iran has constant failures. Despite the fact that Iran has a deep culture of public administration and the experience of the existence of an empire, nevertheless, this experience of the existence of an empire is ancient, and the ancient mechanisms, they do not work in the modern world.
они не работают в современном мире.
In other
То есть
words, the statehood of
государственность
Iran
Ирана,
has not developed
она не
independently all this time,
развивалась все
but
это
only followed
время
global trends.
самостоятельно, а всего лишь следовала за общемировыми трендами,
And
и
as
в
a result,
результате
Iran
этого
fell into a
Иран
certain colonial
впал в
dependence on the same
определенную
West,
колониальную зависимость от того же Запада,
which, by
что,
the
кстати,
way,
выражает
expresses the national
государственный
flag of
план
Iran.
Ирана.
Here,
Вот.
so
Так
all the
вот,
time, we see some kind of a fuss about
мы
Iran's nuclear
все
program.
время видим некую свистопляску вокруг ядерной программы Ирана.
Trump bans
Трамп
it, Biden
ее
allows it, Trump
запрещает,
bans it again.
Байден разрешает, Трамп ее снова запрещает.
This,
Это,
by the
кстати,
way, is the
вопрос о
question
том,
of how effective the
насколько
conclusion of any
эффективно
agreements is,
заключение
even with the
каких-либо
United
договоров
States.
даже с Соединенными Штатами.
That is, the
То
president
есть
has changed,
поменялся
and that's it.
президент и все,
The
программа,
program, the
отношения
relationship has
поменялись.
changed.
И
And
поэтому надо
therefore,
понимать,
it is
что
necessary to
вообще любые
understand that in
договора в
general,
западной
any
культуре
contracts in Western
работают
culture
только
work
лишь
only
тогда,
when the force of the
когда к
one with whom you
исполнению этих
negotiate
договоров
compels the
принуждает
execution of these
сила
contracts.
того, с кем ты договариваешься. Поэтому
Therefore,
пока
as
был
long as there
Советский
was a Soviet
Союз
Union
и
and the
Запад
West complied with the
соблюдал
treaties,
договора ровно в
exactly
той
to the
мере, в
extent that
какой
the Soviet
Советский
Union
Союз
forced the West to comply with
принуждал
these treaties.
Запад соблюдать эти договора.
In the
В
three-volume book
трехдомнике,
that you
который вы
showed,
показывали,
one of the examples is given, and it is the key
приведен
one,
один из примеров,
about
а
when the
он
Soviet
ключевой,
Union
о
signed the
том,
surrender to the West.
когда Советский Союз подписал капитуляцию перед Западом,
That's how this
и как
process went
этот
along with the
процесс шел
surrender
к
of the
сдаче
sovereignty of the Soviet
суверенитета
Union.
Советского Союза.
Everything
Там
is spelled
отдельными
out there
главами
in
все
separate
прописано.
chapters. Here,
Вот.
it's not all,
Вполне
but it's
введен, но
fully
в
enough
полной
so
мере
that a person
достаточно,
can
чтобы
move on
дальше
by
человек мог
himself and
двигаться сам
study.
и изучать.
So,
Так вот,
Iran in modern and modern times has never been able to force anyone to
Иран
comply with the treaties with respect to
в
Iran.
новое и новейшее время никогда не мог принудить кого-либо соблюдать договора в отношении Ирана.
And this one
И
is
вот
infirmity.
эта немощь,
Despite the
при том,
fact
что
that there is
глубинная
a deep
культура
state culture,
государственная есть,
it was
она
fully manifested when,
была
during the Second
проявлена в
World
полной
War,
мере,
the Soviet
когда
Union
во
and Great
время
Britain
Второй
occupied
мировой
Iran,
войны
so
Советский
that no
Союз и
danger emanated from
Великобритания
Iran, as the actions
оккупировали
of the Third Reich of a
Иран
united
для
Europe
того,
and corridors
чтобы
moved through Iran.
из Ирана не исходила какая-либо опасность в качестве действий Третьего Рейха, Объединенной Европы, и через Иран двигались коридоры.
And let me
И
remind
напомню, что
you
в
that in
1943 году именно
1943,
в Иране,
it was
в
in
Иране
Iran, in
состоялась
Tehran,
вот эта первая
that this first
конференция
conference of allies in the
союзников
anti-Hitler
антигитлеровской
coalition took
коалиции,
place,
где
where they tried to
распытались
breed us into a
разведки
sucker.
на Лоха,
And
и
then
тогда
Stalin,
Сталин, ну раз вы не
well, since you
хотите
don't want to talk about the
разговаривать по
substance,
существу,
then we are going
то
back to
мы
the Soviet
отправляемся
Union,
назад в
because
Советский Союз, потому что нам
we have a lot to
у нас
do.
много дел. И
And
вот
that's when the
тогда
West broke down in front of
Запад и
Stalin.
сломался перед Сталиным.
And
И
then they
тогда
had to
они
give this
вынуждены
sword
были
away, because
этот
they
меч
perfectly
подарить
understand
Сталину,
what the
прекрасно
Bolsheviks
понимая,
are
что делают
doing.
большевики.
So,
Так вот,
Iran. It is very strongly tied. It is elite tied to the West.
Иран, он очень сильно завязан, именно элитно завязан на Запад.
The people, they
Народ,
have a
он
state culture,
имеет
an imperial
государственную
culture.
культуру, имперскую культуру.
It needs
Ее
to be
нужно
developed.
развивать.
But the
Но
Godfather,
тут,
this
это имеется в
means
виду
the Supreme
высший
Spiritual
духовный
Council in
совет
this city, is located in
в этом
Godfather.
городе находится, в Куме.
Here he is
Вот.
not coping with his task.
Он не справляется со своей задачей.
And this is
И
evident from the
это
fact
видно
that the
потому,
personnel base that could
как
provide public
из низов
administration does not rise
не
from the bottom.
поднимается та кадровая база, которая бы могла обеспечить государственное управление.
And if it
А если
rises,
она
it is
поднимается,
regularly
то
cut
ее
off at the level
регулярно
of confrontation
срезают
of
на
country
уровне
elites.
противостояния страновых элит.
Here,
Вот.
and
И
this is
этого
clearly not
явно
enough,
недостаточно,
which
что
rises through the
поднимается через
IRC.
КСИР.
Here,
Вот.
we need
Нужны
other
другие
mechanisms, another
механизмы, другое
implementation.
внедрение.
And
И
pay attention, as soon
обратите
as the
внимание,
state
как
formation in its
только
imperial essence begins more or
более-менее
less in
в
Iran,
Иране начинается именно государственное становление в его имперской сущности,
Both the Europeans and the United States are helping Iran develop its nuclear program. As soon as the pro-Western, Western-oriented elite come to control, and after the murder, and now it's no secret to anyone that Raisi was killed as a result of an assassination attempt, and the helicopter has already crashed. It's just due to an explosion on board the helicopter. Here, Pyakin came, which is directed to the west. And here, in order to change relations within the country, it is necessary to create conditions under which the West would become an enemy not only for the bulk of the Iranian population who bear this state culture, but also for the elite that carries out state administration and which is set up to somehow negotiate with the West. And how can this be done? And it is necessary to introduce various sanctions and carry out hostile actions. One of the elements of Iran's confrontation with the West is Israel, which Iran, in general, does not recognize as a state, in the sense that it is a Zionist state and it pursues an anti-human policy.
Что это государство сионистское, и оно проводит античеловеческую политику.
In other words, there are contacts with Jewish theologians, but there is no contact with secular Zionists.
Еврейскими контакты есть, а вот с сионистами светскими нет контакта.
And therefore Israel should disappear in this sense. It should not exist at all, as it were, but Palestine should be restored. After all, it was Palestine. Crusaders were going to Palestine all the time. This was later created by various states: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. It was all Palestine. Here, these were the provinces of Palestine. So that Iran does not get nuclear weapons in the sense that they think that this elite will be pro-Western. They are hindered by all measures in this nuclear program.
В том плане, как им, что вот эта элита будет прозападная, им эту ядерную программу всеми мерами тормозят.
And here, of course, it is necessary to create motivation for the destruction of the state of Israel. Therefore, Israel's hands are striking Iran. A task is being solved that allows optimizing the process of Iran's formation in the center, or rather, as a center of concentration of management at a global level of significance. That is, to move the Eurasian control unit from Europe there. And at the same time, all the foundations are being created so that Israel as a state can be eliminated. Iran can eliminate Israel overnight. Previous attacks by rockets and drones have shown that no Israeli air defense is capable of repelling this attack. The daily practical attacks carried out by the Yemeni Houthis, who constantly break through Israel's air defenses, show that, even in this version, they cannot repel even weak such raids. Can you imagine if hundreds of drones and missiles fly at once? Well, there will simply be no Israel. If a blow is struck at chemical industries, there will be an environmental catastrophe. But here, in this situation, the same principle works. When this territory should be preserved as the future territory of the population,
в качестве будущей территории проживания населения.
And therefore, Iran does not intend to destroy, in fact, this well-established infrastructure, creating an environmental catastrophe there.
Создавая там экологическую катастрофу, Иран не намерен.
He showed it perfectly when he hits only military facilities, as well as infrastructure facilities, that cannot cause an environmental catastrophe. Therefore, if Iran decides to strike at Israel so that Israel ceases to exist, then such a strike is more than possible. Moreover, it will be inflicted from two sides, by the Yemeni Houthis, who have slapped a missile into the aircraft carrier Truman quite well. And he hung around a little, and then said that these planes, well, they fell like that, they fell like that. They were not destroyed on board. And here they are as a result of some maneuvers there, something turned out there. Here. So, the United States is constantly trying to negotiate with the Houthis. Who is trying to negotiate? Countrywomen. Because from the global level, the Houthis are tied to the fact that Iran will take place as a center of concentration of control. And that's why the Houthis have such high-tech weapons. They have finally stopped pretending that these rockets were developed by some kind of slippers who walk in slippers, sit in the mountains, graze sheep with a flock, and then they built a rocket like this in the garage. It has already been recognized that, in principle, all these missiles and drones are Iranian developments, and the final assembly there is in the required quantity. That is, not the entire final assembly, but somewhere you need to bring ready-made blocks straight. And there only the drone or rocket body itself can be assembled. This can already be done really in a garage somewhere in the mountains. Here. So they must have a certain supply of these missiles. And if the Yemeni Houthis and Iran simultaneously strike at Israel, then even in the usual conventional execution, all military facilities and infrastructure facilities that ensure the functioning of the state, they will be destroyed. It's not a problem. The only question is to what extent Iran itself will be ready for the changed situation in the Middle East, and will be able to pick up these processes. But he recently left Syria, having failed there. Agree to partner relations with Russia. No, no, no. We remember how terrorists were hammered in Syria. It was beneficial for Iran itself. If our planes with full combat loads would strike at terrorists, the damage would be caused more. And first the Iranians went for it. We are organizing a jump airfield for you. Please refuel here and strike with full ammunition. And then they said, but now you will do as we want. Russia said, no, we will not be a monkey for you, which will drag chestnuts out of the fire. We would rather not fly with a full combat load, but from Russia, and we will strike with missiles. And we have solved our task in principle. And Iran, as a result of this ass-wagging, got the fact that it failed to cope with the situation when internal betrayal in Russia deactivated the state administration, the impact on the state administration of Syria, and Syria as a failed state. Like all newly created states in principle, they are all wealthy only when there is a stable supranational governance. And Iran has not been able to pick it up, and as a result, Syria collapsed. And collapsed under the influence of what forces? American. Who do the Americans give their bases to when they leave Syria? They are just giving to the very terrorists. Moreover, look, the head of state of Syria, well, of the state, he is officially a terrorist according to American documents. And they were looking for him for 10 million. And Trump is dating him. You see, he is still wanted. $10 million are promised for him, and Trump is meeting with him. And sanctions are being lifted from these terrorists. In other words, this is specifically an indicator that they are the tools of the United States. So, Trump is trying to stabilize the situation, not worsen it, so that he can then transfer it to Iran. Iran, as we see, does not pull these issues. And the fact that Iran has been hit now is very indicative. The fact is that Israel does not have fuel tankers who would be able to ensure the flight of aircraft over such distances. Well, there just aren't any. The Americans have always provided. And now the Americans are saying no, we are not in business. Well, what about fuel tankers? And they are outsourced. In other words, by providing fuel tankers, we are not fighting against Iran. We did not strike Iran. In other words, by supplying weapons to Ukraine, providing intelligence data, inserting flight missions into missiles and drones, the United States does not strike at Russia. And Russia is accepting the same scenario with this Israeli strike on Iran. That is, the United States, as Trump said about this. We still want to solve it through diplomacy. And what does it mean? And this means that the pro-Western elite that put Pyakin at the head of Iran from the side of globalists, that is, Trump, will rule in the right direction. You accept these terms. You don't want to go to war with the United States right away, do you? Although the United States is becoming more and more a paper tiger, they cannot provide controllability within the country. They cannot restore order inside the country, and at the same time, they point to the whole world. And how can they point to the whole world? And when you have order, you have done everything right, yes, and you are an example, then yes, but all your advice is effective. And if everything is on fire for you, and you are trying to impose some rules that do not work in your country, then how do they orient you? So here it is just important to show the situation in which, look, there are countrywomen. We couldn't keep them from hitting you. But if you continue to flirt with them, then, sorry, we will not be able to stabilize and help you to take place as a center of concentration of management, for the sake of which, in principle, you got involved in all these processes in the Middle East. Here. So this is the situation here. And please tell me, I'm still going back to these unrealistically excited Khazar pushers, because they are already rejoicing that that's all. Now Israel will demolish, and like this promised land, what they wanted will turn out. From river to river, from the Nile to the Euphrates, which expresses their flag. Well, yes, they will know their place. But in parallel, please tell me, here we have described all these processes now, shown them, but on the eve of Jesvin and Gaga, there is still such a Bilderberg club going on, a mysterious one has gathered in Stockholm. And from this decision someone inside the European Union, who needs a war in Ukraine at the expense of the United States, is waiting for some solutions, and they want to launch it exactly, I repeat, G and through Gaga. It doesn't matter what it is. The Bilderberg Club, the Committee of 300, the Davos Forum, J7, and so on.
G7 и прочее.
This does not play any
Не
role in
играет
terms of decision
никакой
making.
роли, в плане принятия решений.
That's
Вот
absolutely none.
абсолютно никакой.
These are the
Это
centers of
центры
coordination and
согласования
management, at the
управления,
events of which specific countries are brought to the state administration,
которых
in terms of its
происходит
decisions taken at the supranational level,
доведение до
which they must fulfill.
государственного управления конкретных стран в части ее касающейся решений, принятых на надгосударственном уровне, которые они должны исполнять.
It is not the
Не
Bilderberg Club
Билдербергский клуб
that makes a
принимает
decision,
какое-то
but they will be
решение,
brought
а
there,
им там
and then they
заведут,
formalize
и
with their
они потом
decision, as it
оформляют
were,
своим
what
как бы
was
решением
prescribed from the
то, что
supranational
было
level,
предписано с
hiding behind
надгосударственного
themselves
уровня,
this very
скрывая за
supranational
собой
management.
это самое надгосударственное управление.
That's why these mechanisms, they always work like this. That is, the crowd is exposed to some kind of content club, the Committee of 300, there is the Bilderberg Club, the Roman Club and everything else, but in fact everything is decided behind the scenes by the management. And here the question is, what kind of behind-the-scenes management is this? Again, we return to the confrontation between the American country elites and the American global elite. That is, which scenario will be implemented. Do you remember the illogicality of Merkel's actions? And every time this illogicality of Merkel's actions, it shone through contacts with the United States. One office called, she has such a solution. They called from another office, she has a different solution. And now, when we were talking about Israel's strike on Iran, and the need for Trump to contact the elites, that's through diplomacy.
И необходимость контакта Трампа с элитами через дипломатию.
After all, we were talking about what? If you don't work in this scenario now, then you will work in the scenario of the American country elites. And in this situation in the Middle East, they are inscribed in the creation of a great Israel, when Iran needs to be eliminated, as any potential threat to dominance in the region at all. In other words, there should not be a single state in the region that could say no to Great Israel on any issue. In other words, everyone should do coup and say it, yes, sir. Here, in this regard, it is very important who dominates. After all, it is an absolute misconception that in the United States there is a holistic management. It used to be that presidents changed, but the policy remained the same. But when was that? It was only during the Soviet Union, when the entire Western part, the entire Western civilization, was united by the presence of a common enemy, the Soviet Union. As soon as the Soviet Union ended its existence, a common goal linked by one goal, this connection was severed. And the constraint of one chain collapsed because it became necessary to fight among themselves for access to Russia's resources. And this is exactly the essence of Trump's conflict with the country officials now. But it shows up in everything. In other words, it is necessary for them to impose their policy on the whole of Europe, so that this Europe meekly goes to war with Russia. But Trump also opposes this, and we see how Trump, through Orban, solves the problem of making Europe great again. He decides
Он
it.
же это решает.
And here
И
we are
здесь мы
using
на
the example of
примере
the confrontation of the
противостояния
European Union
Евросоюза
with
с
Orban,
Орбаном,
with even
с
again, not
даже,
even
опять
Hungary
же,
itself.
даже не самой
In
Венгрии. В
Hungary,
Венгрии
see what
смотрите, какие
processes are also
процессы
trying to
тоже
demolish
пытаются Орбана
Orban.
снести.
How is
Так
that
вот,
why the West?
поэтому что Запад?
Let's
Вот
demolish
снесем
Putin,
Путина,
and that's it.
и все.
That's the
В этом
problem.
проблема.
They do not
Они не
understand
понимают, что
that as
снести
soon as
как только
Putin is
снесем
demolished,
Путина,
they will get a
они
situation
получат
in which they will die,
ситуацию,
and
при
we will go
которой
to heaven.
они сдохнут, а мы попадем в рай.
But there
Но
simply
другого
won't be another
варианта просто
option.
не будет.
They don't understand
Они
it.
этого не понимают.
Globalists
Глобальщики это
understand this.
понимают. Но
But
вот это
this is the
противостояние
confrontation of globalists from the United
глобальщиков и
States.
Соединенных
It is
Штатов,
projected on Europe,
оно
and on all those world
проецируется на
centers that have been
Европу
built,
и на все
coordination
те
and management in the
центры
world.
мировые, которые были выстроены, согласования и управления
All
в
those
мире, все
Bilderberg
эти
clubs, the
Бильдербергские
committees of the
клубы,
300,
комитеты
the Roman
300,
clubs, and
римские
all
клубы
the
и все
rest.
прочее.
And
И
here it will be
здесь
necessary
нужно
to
по
look at the
решениям будет
solutions.
смотреть.
If earlier
Вот
these
если
Bilderberg
раньше
clubs and everything else,
вот эти
they made a
Бильдербергские
decision,
клубы и
and
все
it was
прочее,
like a
они
legislative
принимали
one, that
решение,
is,
и
they
оно
understood that they
было
would be done this way and that,
как бы
but now we see how
законодательно.
decisions
То
are
есть
made.
понимали, будут
But they
делаться
cannot be
так, так
fulfilled
и
as a
так.
result of
То есть
internal
в
elite
настоящее
confrontation.
время мы видим, как принимаются решения, а выполнить их не могут в результате внутреннего элитного противостояния.
Because,
Потому
well,
что,
yes, you have
ну
achieved
да,
some
вы
kind of
добились
decision
какого-то
making here,
принятия решения
but
здесь,
Trump's decision
но
is blocked
решение
in Europe
Трампа
by anti-Trump
блокируется в
forces.
Европе
And the
антитрамповскими
decision of
силами, а
anti-Trump
решение
forces in the same
антитрамповских
Europe
сил
is
с той же
blocked by
самой
Trump
Европы
forces.
блокируется трамповскими силами.
Look at how
Посмотрите, как
Slovakia,
начинает
Serbia,
звучать
Hungary are beginning to
Словакия,
sound, and how various elites
Сербия,
are rising within other states.
Венгрия. А как поднимаются различные элиты внутри других государств?
Well,
Ну,
for
например,
example, the
та
same
же самая
adage in
АПГ
Alternatives for Germany, in the same Germany.
альтернатива для Германии, в той же Германии.
But these
Но
are
это же
internal management
процессы
processes.
внутреннего
This is just the
управления,
collapse
это же
of the
как раз
unified management.
развал единого управления.
And
И
therefore, of
поэтому,
course, it is necessary to take into account
безусловно,
what will be announced at the
принимать во
Bilderberg Club,
внимание
but at
вот
the
то,
same
что будет
time,
оглашено
it is
на
necessary to
Бильдербергском
immediately
клубе,
assess the
надо,
state of power
но
groups in
при
the
этом
world,
надо
in the United
сразу же
States, in
оценивать
Europe.
по состоянию властных группировок в мире, в Соединенных Штатах, в Европе.
Here,
Вот,
the way it can be
то,
solved,
как
or
это
it will be
может
some
быть
kind of
решено,
internal
или же
opposition.
это будет какое-то внутреннее противодействие.
So there was
Так
a period when
что
these
период,
institutions that
когда вот
accepted the
эти
world government, here it
институты,
is behind the
которые
scenes,
принимали,
and began to
вот оно
argue.
мировое правительство, вот оно закулисное,
Is
и
this the
начинали
Bilderberg
спорить.
Club,
Это
the world
Бильдербергский
government?
клуб мировое
Is this
правительство,
committee
это
of 300 the
Санкт-Петербургское
world
мировое
government?
правительство. Нет,
No.
вот этот
This period of
безусловного
unconditional execution of the
исполнения
decisions of these behind-the-scenes
решений
groups,
этих
which
закулисных
are announced at these elite
групп,
gatherings in Western
которые
Europe, are announced as
оглашаются
far as they are
на вот
concerned.
этих вот
He has passed this
междусобойчиках,
period of unconditional
элитных в
execution.
Западной Европе оглашаются в части их касающиеся, он вот этот период безусловного исполнения прошел.
That's it.
Все,
It's
он
collapsing.
рушится.
It collapsed
Рухнул
exactly
он
when the
ровно
Soviet
тогда,
Union
когда рухнул
collapsed,
Советский
and the
Союз.
attempt to enter
И
Russia through the Davos Forum. It
вписать
was not crowned
Россию
with
через
success.
Давосский форум, она не увенчалась успехом.
And
И
global
глобальщики
sheiky
это
see it.
видят.
And they are
И они
trying to
пытаются
counteract
с этим
this.
делом
But the
противодействовать. А
country
вот
specialists
страновики
do not
это
see
не
this.
видят.
They
Они
think that
думают,
Russia is
что
still in the
Россия
same
все в
colonial
том же
state in
колониальном
front of the West
состоянии
as it
перед
was in the
Западом, каком
90s.
она была в 90-е
Putin
годы.
only
Путин только
hinders,
мешает,
but
а
in
на самом
fact
деле уже
everything
все
is
не так.
already wrong.
Уже все не
It's
так.
not like that anymore. Then I can't help but ask the question, because everyone would look at it as a funny clowning.
Как бы все посмотрели, как на смешную клоунаду.
It was
Это
Musk's father who
приехал
arrived.
отец Маска.
Oh, how
Ой,
funny,
какой
how
смешной,
funny.
какой
You hung
забавный,
out
ты там
there for
потусовался,
something,
чё-то
and that's
так,
it.
и всё.
But in
А
fact,
ведь
as
в
far as I know,
действительности
I read about
это,
him,
насколько
he had a
я
kind of
знаю,
ruby mine there.
прочитал про него, он там имел вроде шахты рубинов,
That
то
is,
есть
I had,
имел,
I
не
didn't.
имел, там
There
куча
are a lot of
мистиков
myths,
и
and all sorts of
всяких
interesting
такой
darkness.
интересной тьмы.
But such a
Но
wise man whispered to me,
такой
showed me
мудрый
some
человек
events.
мне пошептал, показал некие как бы события,
And,
и
as it turns out,
как
these are very
оказывается,
serious
это
messengers
очень
from very
серьезный
serious
посыльный
elite
от
groups
очень
of precious
серьезных элитных
stones,
групп
from almost
именно
all over Africa.
драгоценных камней чуть ли не со всей Африки.
I don't know
Не
how
знаю,
interesting
насколько
and
она
reliable the
интересная и
information is,
достоверная
but I
информация,
wanted your
но вот
opinion.
хотел вашего мнения.
But this is
Но
not
здесь
about
речь
Africa.
идет не об Африке.
Elon Musk
Сам
himself,
Илон
who,
Маск,
as we have
он же,
repeatedly
мы
said,
уже
is
неоднократно
tied to
говорили,
very serious
завязан на
high-tech
очень
projects of global
серьезные
significance.
высокотехнологичные проекты глобального уровня значимости,
And this
и
is
это
exclusively the
исключительно
level of
уровень
global elites,
глобальных
not
элит, а не
country elites.
страновых.
It is necessary to
Решать эти
solve these issues,
вопросы
as they say, in the shadows.
нужно, что называется, в тени.
And what is the
И
West doing in
что
general?
делает вообще Запад?
They
Они
always laugh,
всегда
make fun of.
посмеются,
In other
обсмеивают. То есть,
words, the ridiculed evil does not
осмеянное
cease
зло
to
не
be evil,
перестает быть
but
злом,
protective
но
barriers are removed from a
с него
person before the
человека
realization
снимаются
of this evil.
защитные барьеры перед реализацией этого зла.
This is the
Вот этот
principle of
принцип
ridicule that
осмеяния
Western media and Western
западные
political strategists always
СМИ,
use, including in order to cover up any serious management
политтехнологи
processes.
используют всегда, в том числе и для того, чтобы прикрыть какие-либо серьезные процессы управления.
But Elon
Но не
Musk's father
может
cannot not
отец
be
Илона
included in the
Маска
supranational
не
management
быть
system if his
включенным
son is
в
engaged
систему
in such.
надгосударственного управления, если сын занимается такими...
And if he
А
comes
если он
here,
сюда
then the topic
приезжает,
needs to be
то
closed.
тему нужно
With
закрыть.
what?
Чем?
Ridicule.
Осмеянием.
And
И
then it
тогда,
means that those who
значит,
are the country's elites, they
вот те,
kind of
кто
belong
страновые
because they do not
элиты,
understand
они,
either
значит,
state
типа
or
принижают,
supranational
потому что не
governance.
понимают ни государственного, ни надгосударственного управления.
Here is what
Вот.
is described again in our 3-volume
Что
book.
описано опять
Here
же,
are the
раз,
constants.
помните, вот постоянно
There are
там
whole blocks
целыми
that need to
блоками
be
надо
told
рассказывать, когда
when you
вы
ask a
задаете
question.
вопрос, там
There
целые
are whole
блоки
blocks
надо
that need to be
рассказывать,
told
чтобы
in order
понять.
to
Так вот, они не
understand.
понимают
So they do not
государственного управления, и
understand
они
public
думают, мы
administration,
сейчас
and they
этого
think we are
человека
going to make
обсмеем,
fun of this
и
person there
там,
in
в
Russia.
России,
Certain people will treat
определенные
him with our
люди к
submission,
нему будут
that it is not
относиться
serious,
именно
and
с
will not
нашей
negotiate with
подачи, что
him,
это несерьезно,
and
с
we
ним
will destroy
договариваться не
everything
будут, и
for
мы
him.
ему все порушим.
Here and the
Вот. А
globalists, they allow the
глобальщики,
country people to do
они
this.
позволяют это делать
Why?
страновикам. Почему?
But
А
because the
потому
crowd
что
should
они
not see this very
должна
management.
видеть вот этого самого
Good
управления.
management
Хорошее
is the
управление
one that
то,
is not
которое
visible.
не видно.
And
И
therefore, in order
поэтому
to carry out
всегда
some kind of
для
management,
того, чтобы
the
осуществлять
supranational
какое-то
management
управление,
always creates some kind of
надгосударственное управление
screens.
создает
We
какие-то
just talked
ширмы.
about the
Мы сейчас
Committee of
только говорили.
300,
Комитет
the
300,
Bilderberg Club,
Бильдербергский клуб, там
everything
все
else
прочее.
there.
Ну,
Well, let's look
посмотрим
at the
на
management of Ukraine.
управление Украиной.
But does
Ну,
Zelensky
разве там
manage anything there?
чем-нибудь управляет Зеленский?
Well,
Ну,
look,
посмотрите,
he's
он
always on the
постоянно в
road.
разъездах.
But when will
Ну,
he
когда
rule the
ему
country?
управлять страной?
Putin drives
Путин
very carefully
очень
because he
аккуратно
has a lot of
ездит,
worries.
потому что у него очень много забот.
And in
И в
public
государственном
administration,
управлении
Xi Jinping
Си
drives
Цзиньпинь
very
очень
carefully. He has a
аккуратно
lot of
ездит, у
internal
него
problems.
очень много внутренних проблем.
And here's
А
some
вот
monkey, the
какая-то
frontman, who poses as the
мартышка,
president.
фронтмен,
He knows these
который
management processes
изображает из
perfectly
себя
well.
президента, он же прекрасно знает. Эти процессы
He does
управления
not know
он их
them,
не знает,
does
не
not
понимает,
understand
их
them.
кто-то
Someone
осуществляет. А
implements
вот
them,
он,
but he
если
goes and
пиарится, он
per,
из себя
he pretends to be
изображает.
himself. Here.
Вот.
So that's it.
Так вот,
Global shiki allow the
глобальщики
crowd to
позволяют
perceive these
толпе
messengers exactly in this way.
воспринимать вот этих посланников именно вот в таком образе.
Ridiculed?
Отсмеяли.
Ha. That's it
Всё,
him.
он,
No one will
с ним
decide
никто
with
решать не
him.
будет.
The management,
То
which is
управление,
really a
которое
public
действительно
administration,
государственное
it will
управление,
solve
оно
issues.
будет решать вопросы.
But these fig
А
leaves have been
вот
created,
эти
they
фиговые
know
листы
perfectly well.
созданы.
Their
Они прекрасно
information is
знают,
brought to all
там
this elite
доводится
in terms of
информация
its response
всей этой
to a
элите,
specific
участию,
managerial
касающейся на
maneuver.
конкретный управленческий маневр.
That's why we
Вот.
also know.
Поэтому тоже знаем.
That's it.
Вот и все.
And you know, Valeriy Viktorovich, the last question, the final one. I started with your commander-in-chief and a very significant event.
Главнокомандующего и очень знакового события.
And I have to
И
ask a
я
question
должен,
about how to say
задать вопрос
about the abomination
про,
and the
как
porn
сказать,
industry,
про
which is
мерзости
developing very much in Russia as well as in our
порно-индустрии,
country.
которая у вас очень сильно в России,
This is
как
the
у нас
Muse.
развивается, это
TV.
Муз-ТВ.
It was so
Вот была
great.
великая
An
Да,
abomination.
есть.
Yes, and the most interesting thing is that it was legalized there almost again. This is Urgenchina, or as it is Pugachevshina. That is, all of this, all of this. Well, this. I do not know. Watching it is worse than Eurovision, and this is happening to you. And the most interesting thing is that we know Pugacheva is an agent person who decided to drag the legalization of LGBT people into Russia. This is surrogacy. This is all transgenderism. She is responsible. And now it turns out that she is not a foreign agent, nothing like that. It's going to be on Channel 1 soon now. In other words, all these creatures are completely returning to Russia. But I'm, wondering what. They are pushing them, these elite ones, that's how the architecture of your state would be. But the people themselves, how can they perceive after what happened 3 years ago? So it's like this one here. I told you, our coat of arms is a double-headed eagle. Conceptual uncertainty. We have a very strong division between the population, the people, and the elite. And here you are when you talk about how they can perceive. Yes, to us now thanks to the fact that this second head, which represents Nabiulina, is being strengthened. There's 21% crazy, and she's doing it only because the clans inside Russia, these clans of the corporate grouping in Russia, they were bent from abroad, contacts were found with them, and that's it. And they provided Nabiulina with the opportunity to create this lawlessness against Russia. And accordingly these bastards, we need to strengthen the personnel somehow. And they all went. Therefore, they began to return them as far as possible. So, they are trying to create their own information environment. They have been trying to do this for a long time. Since Soviet times. Somewhere they went more successfully, somewhere less successfully. But in general, the results showed that they can't etch out Russian culture. But to create a certain crowd, which, by the way, has just the means for idleness. Because we have built this type of colonial economy. When, remember, Fursenko also created that we do not need a human creator. It was a vice of Soviet culture and education. We need a consumer. And he has no state for the consumer. He consumes goods. If these benefits are not there, he needs it. He's not a patriot. He left and went to where it's good, there's the motherland. Where it became bad to live, he returned again somewhere or moved to another place there. So, a certain audience is this. Here. And this is, well, how to say, culling, figuratively speaking. That is, those who rejected Russian culture and became these consumers. It certainly exists. But it is also to a large extent a landmark represented in state administration, which the West hopes for victory in Russia. But the processes are completely different. These are the deep processes of rejection by the people. After all, why was the same Urgent forced to leave? After all, when he ran away there. Peskov himself. What did he say? Just think, those at the front, are they patriots? No. Urgent is a patriot, but he is a scared patriot, but he was scared. As soon as they started returning him here, they even found funding for him. Yes, even he performed at some events there. But in general, the situation turned out to be such that he had to leave again. In other words, Russia pushed him out, did not accept him, no matter how they provided him with finances there, and no matter how they tried to give him some kind of platform. Whenever the question arose that he should return to the TV channel, conduct some kind of program, such discontent began. Do you understand? But the discontent of the people means a lot.
Народа много значит.
Some of the people are now
Часть народа
armed.
сейчас вооружена.
And without this,
И
the state cannot
без
exist.
этого государство существовать не
And
может.
that's
И
why here you
поэтому
want to
здесь
break the Russian people,
вы
but you will get
хотите
it.
русский народ сломать. Но вы получите.
You will get a
Вы
response.
получите ответ.
And then
И
they are
тогда
forced
они
to retreat
вынуждены
every
каждый
time.
раз отступать.
But it's petty
Но
to mess
мелкую
up. Is
пакость
Ergin Pugachev
Урганта,
not
там,
considered
Пугачева
foreign
не
agents
считать
there?
иноагентами.
They continue.
Они
They
продолжают. У
seem
них
to have such
возможности такие
opportunities.
как бы есть.
But look
Но
at how the
посмотрите, как
confrontation
вообще
stands in
противостояние
general.
стоит.
Deputy Defense Minister Ivanov Timur Ivanov is sitting for absolutely obvious
Сидит
crimes
за
committed against the state,
абсолютно
for
очевидные
undermining the defense capability of our state and the
совершенные
combat
против
capability of
государства,
our
и
army.
подрыв обороноспособности нашей государства и боеспособности нашей армии.
Absolutely
Абсолютно
proven things.
доказанные вещи.
He's sitting.
Он сидит.
To let him out,
Чтобы его
his
выпустить,
accomplices are
у
dying
него
like flies.
подельники мрут как мухи.
They are
Их
arrested.
арестовывают,
Immediately they die in
тут же
custody
они
and say,
в заключении
well, now we
подбирают и
need to
говорят,
let
ну, теперь
Ivanov
надо
go,
Иванова
because
отпускать,
here are
потому
the
что вот
charges.
предъявлены обвинения,
Here
вот
he is,
всё,
we write off everything to
списываем
him
на него,
and
а
let
Иванова
Ivanov go.
отпустим.
And they
А
say,
говорю,
no, the
нет,
state, the
государство,
people, no,
народ,
will sit.
нет, будет
He
сидеть.
must
Он
answer
за
for
свои
his crimes.
преступления должен ответить.
What does this
Что
fascist
делает
liberasnia
сверху
do to the
вот эта
answer?
либерасня фашистская?
They arrest a
Они
patriot general
арестовывают
whose actions
генерала,
thwarted the
патриота,
offensive of the Ukro-Nazis, and
действия
as a result,
которого сорвали
Russia did not suffer a
наступление,
crushing defeat. A coup d'état was not committed, but
нацистов,
Russia, on the contrary,
и
defeated the
в результате
invasion.
этого Россия не потерпела сокрушительного поражения, не был совершен государственный переворот, а Россия, наоборот, разбила
They
вторую.
arrested
Они
Popov.
арестовали Попова.
They showed him.
Предъявили ему.
Well, what the
Ну,
investigators
чего
came up
следователи
with,
придумали,
that's
вот
how much
поскольку их
imagination they
фантазии
had,
хватило,
they came up
они
with,
придумали,
they showed
ему
him.
предъявили.
But the
Но
result seemed
результат
like this.
оказался
They
такой.
wrote
Ему
articles to him,
статьи-то
but they can't bring the
написали,
facts under the
а под
articles,
статьи фактологию не могут подвести,
because there is
потому
neither
что
an
в них
event
нет
nor a
ни
crime in the
события,
actions.
ни состава преступления в действиях.
But how is it
Но как
exposed that
выставляется вот
Popov
это
is
то,
sitting?
что Попов сидит?
Release our
Выпустите
Ivanov.
нашего
Let's release your
Иванова,
Popov.
выпустим вашего Попова.
And the state
А на
cannot
какие
agree to such
договорники
agreements,
государство пойти не может.
because as
Потому
soon
что
as the
как
state
только
goes for it,
государство на это
everything,
пойдет,
the state will fall
всё,
down.
государство посыпется.
And that's why
И
Popov,
поэтому
in general,
Попов,
continues to
в
defend his
общем-то,
homeland while
продолжает
in prison.
защищать родину, находясь в заключении.
Everyone
Все
understands
прекрасно
perfectly
понимают,
well that
что
it
это
was done
сделали
by fascists,
фашисты,
podpindosniki.
подпиндосники.
He was
Его
arrested.
арестовали.
Those
Те
same
самые
podpindosniki,
подпиндосники, фашисты,
fascists who
которые
destroyed the
разрушали
country,
страну
and who
и
are a
которые,
member of which, this
членом
clan
которой,
corporate
вот
group
этого
is
корпоративной
Timur Ivanov.
группировки является
This
Тимур
former
Иванов,
deputy
когда-то
defense
бывший
minister, and
замминистра
Elvira
обороны,
Nabiulina
и Эльвира
Siluanov.
Набиуллина, Силуанов,
Yes,
да их
you can list them by last
фамилиям можно
name.
перечислять.
That is,
То есть
these
вот этих
fascist
фашистов,
podpondosnik, they can be
подпиндосников, их
seen,
видно,
they
они
showed
себя
themselves in
показали
full.
по полной программе.
But they have
Но
a
у
state
них есть
instrument,
государственный
and this is very
инструмент,
important.
а это очень
A state
важно,
instrument.
государственный инструмент.
See how this
Смотрите, как
happens
это
with the
происходит
example
на
of
примере
Trump.
Трампа.
One court
Один
cancels
суд
Trump's decree,
отменяет указ Трампа,
regardless of the
вне
fact that there is
зависимости
a
от того,
law
что есть
prohibiting the
закон,
repeal of
запрещающий
presidential
отменять
decrees,
указы президента.
and another
А
court
другой суд
reinstates Trump.
восстанавливает,
In other words, the state is also split. But global elites and American country elites are split there.
Глобальные элиты и американские страновые элиты.
And we have it
А у нас
conceptually.
оно концептуально.
In our
У
elite,
нас в элите
here are those who are
те,
now,
кто
about
сейчас
whom
по
you are
кого вы
talking,
говорите,
and
и
who
кто
keeps
ему
him on
тылы
TV,
держит, и кто
and who
на
goes to
концерты
concerts
там
there for
кого-то
someone
там
there.
ходит.
They don't
Они
even
даже
represent
представляют
even 1%
даже
of the population.
1% населения.
They don't
Даже
even
1%
represent
не
1%.
представляют.
But thanks to the
Но
economic
у
model,
них,
they have a lot of
благодаря
funds,
модели
they have a lot of
экономики,
money,
много
and they are
средств, у
integrated.
них много
They
денег,
just make up
и
the
они
highest state administration.
интегрированы, они как раз составляют высшее государственное управление.
And that's
И
exactly
именно
why it seems that they
потому-то
can.
и
That's
кажется,
why it
что
seems to the
могут,
West
вот
that
это
they
вот
can defeat
Западу
Russia,
кажется, что
but
могут
still
они
it's shit,
победить Россию.
sorry.
Ну все же это говно,
It's here, it
извините.
is in
Оно
public
же вот оно в
administration.
государственном управлении.
Putin, like,
Путин
can't
типа
do
ничего не
anything with
может сделать
Nabiulina.
с Набиуллиной.
No,
Нет.
Putin can do
может
with
сделать с
Nabiulina.
Набиуллиной.
But
Но
the
вопрос в
question
том,
is that Putin perfectly
что Путин
understands the
прекрасно
consequences for the
понимает
state.
последствия для государства.
And Putin
И
solves it
Путин
in other ways.
решает это другими способами.
And look at the
И
result.
результат-то смотрите какой.
Nabiulina,
Набиуллина,
having reached
дойдя до
21%,
21%,
no longer
больше
raises.
не повышает.
At the same
При этом
time,
постоянно
he
заявляет,
constantly
что
declares
надо
that it is
выше ставку
necessary to
делать.
make a higher bid. Moreover,
Более того,
they are here.
они здесь
Reducing the rate by 1% to
снижение
20%
ставки
does not
на
solve anything
1%
for
до
the economy.
20% не решает для экономики ничего.
But how did they
Но они
decide?
как решили?
And we will
А
show
мы
that,
покажем, что
like
типа
we bend,
мы
that we are right there.
гнемся, что мы вот там это
But in
самое. А
fact,
на самом
these
деле,
cattle
нате,
eat
быдло,
and that's it.
жрите, и все.
How did the state
Как
perceive it?
восприняло
How did the
государство?
people perceive
Как
it?
народ
And
воспринял?
what
А
does it
что это
solve?
решает?
Are
Ты
you
нам там
throwing us some
какую-то
kind of
подачку
handout like
кидаешь.
cattle? We're
Мы
scum,
тебя
we see right through
мразь
you.
видим насквозь.
Therefore,
Поэтому
the situation as it is perceived by the
та
state and the
ситуация,
people in
как
general,
ее
it forced her to
воспринимает
maneuver.
вообще, собственно, государство и народ, оно заставило ее маневрировать.
The fact that they
То, что
dropped this
они
percentage, they
вот
showed that
этот
everything,
процент скинули, они показали, что все,
the limit of
предел
impact on society has been reached.
воздействия на общество достигнут.
They can't go
Дальше
any
они не
further,
могут,
and
у
their
них не
resource
позволяет
potential
ресурсный
doesn't allow it.
потенциал.
Here,
Вот.
so they didn't
Так
put
что
up with it, they didn't go to
они
improve the
не
economy.
смирились, они не пошли на улучшение
No,
экономики.
they
Нет,
didn't
они
do any
ничего
of
этого
that,
не сделали.
but they have
Но
shown that they no longer have the
они
resource
показали,
potential.
что у них больше нет ресурсного потенциала.
And that's
И
good.
это хорошо.
And then the
А
country
дальше
will
уже
stand.
страна
The
выстоит.
country will
Страна
still
все равно
stand.
выстоит.
And here I
Вот
was telling
я про
about
Иванова
Ivanov and
и
Popov just to show
Попова рассказывал.
the
Как
hero
раз
general was
показать.
imprisoned for nothing.
Генерала-героя посадили ни за что.
There is neither the
Нет ни состава,
composition
ни
nor the
событий
event of the
посудили.
crime.
Несколько
There are
статей.
only articles. But the other
А
one
вот
has
на другом
everything.
все есть.
He has a lot
У
of
него куча
accomplices who are
подельников,
blamed for these
на которых
crimes.
списывают
They are
эти
dying like
преступления, они
flies.
мрут как мухи.
Can you imagine the level?
Представляете уровень?
The generals are
Генералы
dying
мрут
like
как
flies,
мухи,
so that
чтобы
only
только
Ivanov
вышел
will be released.
Иванов на свободу.
Here is the
Вот такая
situation.
ситуация.
Yes,
Да,
and while
пока
such
такие
Pugachevs and
Пугачёвы
Urgents
и
will
Урганты
put
будут
patriotic generals in
садить в
prison,
тюрьмы
let there be such a war.
патриотических
And
генералов,
everything
да,
will be the
будет
same for
такая
us.
война, и у нас все будет таким образом.
So it's
Так что
necessary,
надо
that's
вот
how the
как
motherland
выбирать,
asks,
спрашивать,
choose.
выбирайте.
Are you for
Или за
Pugacheva
Пугачёва,
or for
или за
Popov?
Попова.
So thank you
Так что
very
спасибо
much,
вам очень
very,
сильно,
very much
очень,
knowledge
очень
and
много
information. They will read your
знаний
books.
и
And
информации.
I will ask more serious
Буду читать
questions
ваши
and
книги
more
и буду
conceptual
задавать
ones.
более серьезные вопросы и более
Thank you,
концептуальные.
Valery
Спасибо вам,
Viktorovich.
Валерий Викторович.
Thank you,
Спасибо
Anis
вам,
Kazimirovich.
Казимирович.
See you
До
later.
встречи.
Have a nice day.
Всего хорошего.